couple things. Great to see you. Welcome. I have to point out that I looked down while Barrett was talking, and I saw this book here, and I thought, oh, that's a good solution. You know, apparently, you know, this is kitty corner, and they needed to prop it. And then I noticed the title, The Surprising Solution. And I thought, that is just like the cosmic reality that manifested in that book, with that title being that solution to this moment. It was just, it was amazing. It was amazing. So, and it's just a delight to be here with Cam. I mean, the three of us connected a long time ago in 2004 at the first Integral Ecology and Sustainability Seminar. Barrett and I were presenters. It was the first time that we really presented like a major seminar together, and we've been working together since then, you know, almost for a decade now. And in some respects, this is the first time, even though we've been collaborating in various ways or supportive of each other's work, this is kind of a coming back home party for the two of us, in that we haven't presented on ecology and sustainability together since that seminar. And then to have Cam here and to have Cam bringing all these amazing students is just a wonderful sense of 2004 arc, 2012, you know, all the things that have happened in 8 years. So really lovely to see you, Cam.
You too. This is thrilling.
So I love theory. Man, do I love theory. And I love models, and I love frameworks. And so my growing edge is to be able to kind of drop down from that and to like feel theory, right? Because I can think theory really well. So today, in the time that I have with you, I want to step onto my growing edge, which is to try and communicate to you a feeling for integral ecology. Because I trust that, you know, maybe some of you read some of the materials that we sent you. You've read Cam's materials, you've been engaged with a lot of models and frameworks, you're familiar with integral a little bit, you know, so you can get more access to the theory in that context. And with our precious time together, like I want to try and see if we can develop a felt sense of why this theory or theories like this can be so valuable and really serve us and serve the work we're doing and trying to serve the world, you know. So this book that I wrote with Michael, you know, it's a big book. It's very thick. You're very lucky. I only sent you the like 15-page overview, right? You know, because I was tempted to send Cam the PDF of this, but you know, I realized that was probably expecting too much.
Could have been our textbook.
Yeah, that's true, and it has been in many programs, which has been a delight. So in integral theory, there's a model called AQAL, A-Q-A-L. And the first part stands for all quadrants, the second part, all levels. And so I'm going to focus primarily on the quadrant side of that, and Barrett's going to focus more on the level side of that. So that between the two of us, you are going to get a felt sense of integral. And then we'll do some stuff outside with me later that, you know, we'll serve that as well. So just to begin with, you're familiar with the quadrants, most of you? Yeah? So I just want to do a quick like meditation. Keep your eyes open if you want. You can close them if you want. But I just want you to notice your direct experience right now. Just notice what you're feeling, emotions, thoughts, body sensations, just whatever's arising in your direct awareness of yourself in this moment. So just notice that it's available to you. You just have to shift your awareness, kind of go inward in some sense, and there it is. And this quality of your consciousness, this embodied quality of who you are, is always there, right? Moment to moment to moment. So you're noticing it just arise right now, like, oh, there's a feeling, there's a thought, there's a sensation. My feet are on the ground. I can feel the cool air going across me. Whatever it might be, it's just all there. So now we're just going to shift a little bit with our awareness. And I want you to notice what your senses are doing. They're bringing you information, right? So you can hear my voice. You might even be able to sense that I'm recovering from a cold, because my voice has that kind of recovering from a cold sound, right? You can, if your eyes are open, you can see the colors in the room. You can see the size of my body, how tall or short I am, how big or thin I am. Right? So your eyes give you a sense of the shapes and the colors and the different objects in the space. And, you know, on your skin, like I was saying before, you can feel the breeze coming through. You can feel where you're touching the seat or the floor. So all your senses are bringing information into you moment to moment to moment. You don't have to do anything. It's just ongoingly happening. It's just a question of whether you bring attention to it or how you bring attention to it. So we're going to shift again. So now notice the quality of connection you have with each other in this group. Just that sense of relationality, of friendship, of maybe even disconnection between some of you. Maybe, you know, the sense of being on this journey together, the sense of being in a program together, the ways in which you've taken many courses together possibly, or, you know, live in the same dorm room, or, you know, all these kinds of things. Like, there's relationship here, and you can feel it. You just shift your awareness and you feel the field of connectivity that exists between all of you. And then you also have that with me and Gil and Barrett, right? We're new into the space, but there's ways in which you feel connected or open to us, or maybe not so open to us. Maybe not yet. Maybe you're just kind of waiting to get a deeper sense of who we are or what we're about. But there it is, that field of relationality. Always available to you, moment to moment to moment. Right? It just arises naturally. You don't have to do anything. You just simply relax. And there it is. You feel connected or not. You feel the many layers of connection and relationship. So we take another shift, right? And we can feel into the architecture of this room and where we're situated within this space. You can have a felt sense of walking up those stairs and walking down the street from the BART, being on the BART, coming from San Francisco. So you have a felt sense of the geographical space-time reality that you've been navigating for the last 3 hours, right? Waking up, leaving the hotel, getting on public transportation. Like, your body has a sense of where San Francisco is, right? And where Berkeley is and how Berkeley is laid out and the streets and what it's like to be here near the park by the cafe, you know, where the restroom is, some of you, right? So there's a way in which your physical body is orienting to all of those realities. And you have a sense of the systems that we're in, you know, the civic systems, the public transportation, the urban grid, right? The economics, paying for your BART fare, right? The pedagogical and educational system that we're selecting ourselves into during this process this morning, right? So you have a felt sense of those many systems. And that felt sense is just available to you right now. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to think anything about it. You just open awareness and it's like, oh, there's a lot of systems. There's a lot of realities that I've been navigating and interfacing with just in the last 2 hours. So then one last stop on our little tour of consciousness, at least for this segment. And that is just to take a breath. And open up awareness to all 4 of those dimensions at the same time. Noticing that you have experience arising in your own being. Somatic, emotional, and thoughts. You have a connection and a sense of relationality with the people in this room. You have the realities the senses are bringing into you through your eyes, your ears, your nose, your mouth, your skin. And you have a sense of the many systems that you've been plugging into and interfacing with. And just allow consciousness, allow your embodied awareness just to open and relax such that your awareness can be a container for all of those layers of who you are in this moment. It's like, wow, there's a lot going on. It's like, holy smokes, like, I don't know if I've ever just stopped and just realized there's all of those layers and they're always available to me moment to moment to moment. Right? So thank you. You can shift, like, well, we want to stay connected to that space, but you can open your eyes, and I want to make a few points and connections. For me, this is the starting point of integral theory, right? Integral theory highlights that we are dynamic, complex beings. Our consciousness is diverse and expansive, deep and wide, and it can hold a whole host of realities, right? And also for me, what's important about this kind of exercise is it helps link the theory, which for those of you who have maybe studied integral theory a little bit or other very complex theoretical approaches, is it can be very abstract. It can be really high level. Integral theory has that, but it's also always asking itself, what's the relationship between that and what's happening right here? What's happening in my body, in my emotions, in my relationships, in my systems, in my direct experience of those realities, and my engagement with those realities. Right? So integral theory is always interested in the relationship between, shall we say, practice, like this was one form of practice, what we would call first-person practice, and theory. And it's always looking for those intersections because it feels that our theory is going to be more powerful and more useful to the extent that we can ground it in our direct experience. And our direct experience is going to be more meaningful and more provocative and more skillful to the extent that we're able to understand it in the context of theoretical distinctions. Right? So there's a nice dance between these two polarities, these two poles. Right? So I just want to walk us through a few pieces of integral ecology and then check and see what kinds of questions and concerns or challenges you have. I'm excited if you love it, and I'm excited if you hate it. If you just say, man, this is bullshit, like, no worries, like, bring it on. Because for me, like, to engage and to, like, look at the limitations, to look at the blind spots, to really get into that juicy kind of conversation is what it's all about, right? So I want you to really feel like you can bring your challenges, your concerns and doubts forward. Because otherwise we're not in connection, right? We're not in deep inquiry around how can this be useful. So this is not the cover of the book, right? This is the cover of the book with a quadrant and the frog, and it's an attempt to show how you can see a frog through the quadrants, right? So you have the upper left, well, that's on this side, upper left, which is the eye, so like the sentience of the frog. Like if you look at a frog in the eye, like it's hard to not notice that there's a quality of aliveness there, a being that's breathing and probably sensing and responding to its environment. On this side you have the bone of the face, so a good scientific view. Then down here in the lower left, the cultural quadrant, you have the baby frogs and the eggs and family and just kind of the sense of connectivity that exists even at that level within the species. And then it's really hard to diagram the lower right, the systems quadrant, so I decided to make it a robotic frog, like cybernetics and computers and all of that. But anyway, so that's the cover. But I like this cover because this was the cover that was not chosen, right? So part of integral is to be aware of what's not included or what's not chosen, and include that. And the lighting in here doesn't do it as much justice as on screen, but essentially it just shows all these different perspectives, kind of almost a mandala of understandings, and each of these little windows kind of shows different aspects of sustainability or ecology. Because as the title says, it's about uniting multiple perspectives on the natural world. So we're going to explore a little bit about that. So when I began as a grad student, like my first year, I said to myself, I've done a lot of reading in ecofeminism, deep ecology, all these different schools of environmental philosophy, and I know there's a couple different schools of ecology, like landscape ecology and evolutionary ecology, and I thought, gosh, I wonder how many different schools of ecology there are. I said, I bet there's at least 12. I said, it seems like there's at least 12. So I started asking people, how many, how many do you think there are? And people would say, 30. Some people, if they felt like they're being very kind of risky, would say 50. Well, I started making a list and keeping track of all these different schools I would come across. I discovered it was more than 40. It was actually more than 75. It was actually over 200. And I thought, holy shit. Like, what? Like over 200 schools of ecology? Like, that's insane. Like, how is that the case? Right? So I realized that I really needed an integral model to help hold and organize and coordinate the truths from those 200, right? And not that I felt that the project of integral ecology needed to figure out the insights from all 200 and weave them together, but I wanted to come up with a framework and an approach to ecology that could in principle do that, so that people, depending on where they were coming into the process, could have an organizing framework to work with multiple and even contradictory views of the natural world or sustainability.
Yeah, I guess those are only formalized schools that we're talking about, not cultural, or I'm thinking First Nations alone would be way more. Just because it says approaches to the environment.
Right.
So
no,
we're
it's a great point.
Formalized schools.
Yeah.
Where people writing and there's discourse about it.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, and that even shows you the magnitude of the additional important schools of thought and perspectives that are out there. So yeah, the 200, and they're listed in the appendix here with a short paragraph for each one with kind of key figures and resources. And it's highlighting schools that have PhD programs connected to them, or have journals connected to them, or have professions connected to them, more formalized academic pieces that I developed to kind of help hold all this together. Is the notion of integral ecology is the who times the what times the how. And actually, I should have that be reversed. It should be who times how times what. So the who is, who are they as they are looking, right? Who are the ecologists, the environmentalists, or who are we? The how is, how are ecologists looking at that part of reality? And the what is, what part of reality are ecologists or sustainability practitioners looking at? So this framework, the who times how times what, became a really useful way of navigating some of the complexity. And there's this way in which the three of those layers actually create each other, right? It gets very difficult when you start pulling them apart and trying to isolate them. That just as this Escher's drawing shows, they actually co-create, or what we call enact, all three. So the observer, the mode of observation, and the observed work in this dynamic way to produce the phenomenon. And the way our minds work, the way our disciplines work, is we tend to isolate one aspect of that process, which is fair and appropriate. And then the unfortunate thing is that then we sometimes reify that and disassociate that from the other aspects. So here are different pictures of nature. And so there's no single nature. It's one of the main insights for me that emerged out of this work. So here are different kind of types of natural environments: the desert, jungle, tundra, so forth. Right, so just in terms of physical nature, there's no single nature. But that leads us to ask, then how do we define nature? Because some people think of pristine environment, some people think of even agricultural or lumber or camping, rent your piece of concrete for the weekend, go to nature, or even the urban landscape can be viewed as nature. There's this beautiful quote by Gary Snyder in one of his poems where he talks about looking at a skyscraper and realizing that it was a riverbed turned up on its end. Right? So he's looking at the skyscraper and he's seeing a riverbed. And he just says it in a way that's just it's like, wow, I would have never thought that. But now that he's saying that, there's a way in which I'm shifting how I'm relating to the urban environment. And maybe it is fairly and appropriately an expression of nature. So there's worldviews, and this is where Barrett's going to talk about later today. There's different worldviews around nature and what is or isn't nature, as we were talking about with the Newt Gingrich comment, right? So there's the big three that we often talk about, the I, the we, and then the it, in integral theory. And then this is often broken out into 4 quadrants: intentional or experiential, cultural, behavioral, and social. Right? So our little meditation at the beginning was a tour through that. So just notice how it is to like look at this diagram, which is like a third-person map, and then feel back to 15 minutes ago when we did that exercise. That this is one way of presenting that process, right? And how both of them give you a different access to the truth or reality of what this represents. Right? Both are important. So part of my task in writing the book was coming up with a definition of integral ecology. And so I landed on this as one form. There's another version also, but it's the recognition that environments or systems, so that's one quadrant, are comprised of individual members, so that's like kind of the behavioral quadrant, which have interiors or experiences, so like the upper left quadrant, that overlap and form horizons of meaning between and across species. So cultures, even cultures between frogs or frogs and insects and deer and wolves. And there's some great work that's being done around culture in animal species like that. Obviously it's very different from what we think of as culture, typically. But there's meaning making, there's interpretation, there's even the traditions, cultural traditions within certain species. So like orcas, pods of orcas have certain traditions of hunting and killing that differ from pod to pod to pod that they pass on to their young, right? And they're learned and they're taught. You know, so a lot of the things that we usually point to as being markers of culture in human species, we find, you know, kind of prototypical or primitive expressions or versions of that in a number of species, not just primates. So integral ecology is an approach to ecology that's radical in 2 ways, in my mind. One is the recognition that the organisms in the environment have experiences and relationships, right? That they have interiority. And so how would our ecological science change if we really incorporated that insight, right? And it would change dramatically. And there's some cool work being done out there that is hardcore ecological environmental science that's including that kind of insight, right? So there's a book out called what is the name of that? It's like I'm forgetting the name. It'll probably come to me. But it's looking at the role of fear between big game in like Yosemite, so like moose and elk, and wolves, and the role that fear plays, the experience of fear by those, you know, animals in relationship to the predators that prey on them. And then they've tracked the dynamics of fear. It's very fascinating. But it really changes how they understand population dynamics, they understand territorial realities, how they understand, feeding patterns and so forth. So it's by including fear, it's helping them to understand what we typically study in the right-hand side of behavior and systems. So there's the 4 quadrants of an individual, and this is what we did this morning, right? We put ourselves in the middle, and then we experienced the upper left, and then the upper right, and so forth. So we can use the quadrants to either look at reality in 4 ways, or to experience reality from ourselves in 4 different ways. When we look at reality, we put something in the middle, like a toxic spill in a lake, and then we draw on the traditions associated with the quadrants to make sense and understand and to analyze that problem and what are the possible solutions. Right? So this is some of the barrier work that you've been exposed to with CAM's research and study of how there's different barriers, psychological barriers, cultural barriers, behavioral barriers, systemic barriers that we're well served to pay attention to and then include in our process of generating integral solutions to complex, wicked problems. Almost as many as the ones focus on the more kind of typically understood approaches. And I've seen this pattern in a lot of areas. I've seen it in psychology, I've seen it in many places in sustainability and so forth. That there are already approaches out there that generally cover these 4 major domains, right? And in your tour down the coast, you're probably running into some perspectives that emphasize more psychological aspects or more systemic aspects, more behavioral, or cultural dimensions, right? You're probably already encountering that range of emphasis and expertise. And so part of what's valuable about the integral model is it just helps us organize and coordinate that which is already there. And it helps us see what we might be leaving out. Right? Yeah, Cam.
Sean, I wonder if I can just check in
Please,
and
yeah.
see if we can, so we make sense of this. Can you think of, in the experiences we've had, the people that we've met, can you see how they might fit on that quadrant model? Can you see some that emphasize the upper left or emphasize the lower right? Yeah.
The tsunami preparedness person was really focused on the psychological aspects of tsunami preparedness.
Yeah, great. Cool. Other examples?
Yesterday at the restaurant, they were talking about like the transitions that they talk about. So that would be the I, like the spiritual, kind of checking in, and then maybe below it, the we would be more like the community building that we saw with like the painting the intersections. It's just the cultural kind of.
Yeah, exactly. Great. Please.
And we talked to someone from, what's the place we were at? Safe Routes to School in Eugene. They addressed a lot of actually getting people out there, which would be the we, as well as the I. And I feel safe on the streets, but then also some of the really structural its barriers in terms of physical infrastructure in the cities and moving through and putting in those bike lanes.
Yeah, great. Please.
If you're going to just looking at this, you see the agriculture stopped off and see both urban and rural agricultural spaces. So that falls a lot under the structural and the its portion. And then obviously a lot of times you can talk to the cities. They talk about it from the top down, kind of here's the infrastructure that we're planning on putting in and to reduce those sort of stuff. And a lot of that falls under its.
Yeah, great. One more example? Anyone? Yeah, please.
Ethan Sulzer from the Portland University was talking about Cascadia as a region, and he was talking about it in an ecological context and geographical and historical.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Cam. So how does that feel? Like, what are you feeling? Like, I've given a little bit of theory, I've kind of explained the framework, given some examples. We've heard from you as how different individuals that you've been encountering and engaging tend to represent or emphasize some of these different aspects of reality. What are you feeling about all of this? Like, is this interesting? Is it too simplistic? Like, kind of, how does this plug into what's happening with you right now?
To me, it's a great tool to organize your own thoughts and like all these people that we see, and it makes so much sense. And it's easier to then decipher what we do about it.
Yeah.
When it's in a category, then you can kind of go, well, we need to change this about the I, we need to do this, and hit all the sectors to make the overall change. It's so much easier than having everything and being like, well, what do we do?
Yeah, like having it in a big bin and you're just like, oh my God, where do I start?
Yeah, it's really helpful to me. I don't know.
No. Great. Who else? Yes, in the back.
I think it's really intelligent because, like, even if you're trying to approach like a new project or like a change, if it's not working, then it's probably a good chance that it's like one of these things is not being considered.
Yeah.
And so it's just nice. I guess it's a really good model because then you don't have to like overwhelm yourself thinking of all the possibilities. You can kind of narrow down the categories and like maybe pick one and then narrow that down. And just, it's really organized.
Yeah, great. Just one quick comment, then I'll call on a few more. The point that you just made about one area not being included is, often happens, and that's in part what led me to talk about sustainability as, that the more of reality you include, like in this kind of sense, the more sustainable your projects are going to be. Because if you leave out the psychological dimension of an important sustainability project, over time it's probably not going to be very sustainable, right? And likewise with all 4 dimensions, you know, so to increase sustainability, I would suggest you're served by including all 4 realities. And you might start with one area first, right? So like with the tsunami preparedness example, like you might start with kind of looking at the psychological aspects, the emotional, you know, and so forth. But if you'll need to deal with all 4 to really be successful in that. So it's fine to have a starting point or an emphasis, but it's great to also, in the process, find a way to include all 4, because if you don't, it's actually going to cripple your initiative.
This just made me think of one of the articles we read from class was World Education Tour by David Warren. He always emphasizes the fact that we've been so fragmented into disciplines and sub-disciplines that we often forget sort of like the bigger implications of our actions. So I think this is a really good model for sort of understanding that sort of everything is integrated. And you can't just think of something in terms of your discipline, but actually how is that going to affect other things. This is just a really good framework for piecing everything together.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and interestingly, just recently we published an article in the Journal of Integral Theory and Practice, and in it the author talks about different approaches to environmental education, and there's like 3 or 4 major schools out there, and one school emphasizes this, kind of more the felt sense of being out in nature and connect, you know, and like having experiences in the natural world. Another approach really emphasized the relational aspects and kind of the cultural dimensions. And then one really talked about just kind of learning more facts about, you know, our situation. So it's interesting, even within like a field like environmental education, you tend to see approaches that tend to gravitate towards 1 or 2 of these and kind of emphasize them. And then another school will come along and say, hey, we're not, you know, that's great and all, but we're not including this. So then a whole school will emerge that kind of emphasizes that. So I see that dynamic over and over again. It's fascinating. Yeah, in the back and then in the yellow.
Just to sort of challenge it a bit.
Good.
I'm kind of wondering, like, you know, can it ever just sort of become like just an over-analysis of something that is almost, you know, a lot of these things are kind of intuitive,
right?
You know, and, you know, you've got 200 different schools of thought in this. Does it ever get to a point, you know, where it's just too much thought that you're sort of just overcomplicating, you know, basic understandings? And then,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's one of the risks of this model and other models. You know, and there are people working with integral, you know, theory that do go to that extreme and kind of unnecessarily complicate it or make it too theoretical or just, you know, make it difficult to even move forward because there's such a layer of complex analysis that it's like actually not even better, it might even be worse than, you know, kind of what was before. So there is an issue around scale and to, you know, in what ways do you use this, you know, and how much detail do you need. So, and it depends on context and it depends on your background, but absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's nice, and this looks nice, and it's just like I'm trying to imagine how is it that you can categorize this big messy planet of ours.
Right.
Very subjective, very interpretive.
Right.
It's still nice, but it's, you know, as you said, it's dynamic and it's very, people have different perspectives on things.
Yeah.
Just as you said with the sustainability schools, they look at it differently.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and you know, there is some kind of intuitive, subjective dimensions to placement. There are more kind of objective ways of characterizing where things go. You can come up with criteria and you get people to agree on that. So you can make it a more objective method or process, and some have and are doing that in integral theory. You know, so again, it's like some people use it more kind of subjectively. Some people develop a protocol and a criteria of placement. And so there's both of those. And, you know, things bleed over. The point isn't that these approaches are only in that approach, right? There's a lot of crossover. So one of the dangers is to see these lines as fences.
Well, we love to do that, right?
Right. Yeah, there's a tendency.
It makes my world easier.
Exactly. So one of the challenges.
I would imagine that geographers would be putting geography in all of the quadrants, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. A lot of times. Yeah. Exactly.
Human geography and interior geography.
Exactly. You know, so part of it is as practitioners, sustainability practitioners, when we work with a framework like this or any framework, is to find the right balance of holding it loosely, of realizing the categories are valuable, but if we over-reify them, if we use them to divide unnecessarily, then it's going to blind us to other layers of what's important, right? So there's an optimal kind of engagement with a framework like this, that you want the dignity of it, so that it helps you see more, it helps you include more and relate more, but you don't want the disaster of it, which would be the over-complexification. It would be the unnecessary division between phenomenon or categories, reifying things. So, that's just an issue we all face whenever we're working with conceptual maps.